Okay, so I guess what we're talking about here today is, what exactly are we selling people? I know that they like to call it AI, artificial intelligence, but is it? I wouldn't call it that. I'd call it machine learning. That's the more accurate way to talk about it. It is, I think, a an advance in trying to get a good framing here. I know. Okay, so we're we're talking here about um a certain we're talking here about artificial intelligence. Now, I've been a student of cognitive sciences for, well, my whole life in one way or another, but in much more fine-grained detail uh, when I got into when I got into college. And I guess I guess um, pardon me. I think it's easier to focus on you if I can, see that clearly. Um, so let's just essentially review what your average system is really doing. What it's doing is predicting the right response based on your prompt. It's predicting word by word what it should be saying. It is a very, very astute chatbot. And when it goes and it brings up stuff, makes your AI art, what is it doing? It's doing something that's not much more different than that, only it's doing it for images. It's taking a kind of memory of what an apple is. If you ask for an apple, of what a spaceship is, if you ask for a spaceship, it's traveling this, semantic map and recovering that information and producing something based on it. But again, it's basically you're sifting through a semantic database. You're sifting through that in order to finally, you know, come up with what the person is asking for. But this is an extraordinary thing. But let's make no mistake here. It's an extraordinary thing, but it's kind of a brute force way to do something that we do very much more efficiently. And we're not confined to, to just copying styles. We can make our own. Just getting that. We're doing something with this 100-watt wonder that those systems are not capable of doing with kilowatt, megawatt, gigawatt um, data centers because it is operating like a it's operating it's operating less like a human brain does, and just more brute forcing a data problem, treating it like it's a data problem, treating it like if you teach it enough, if you create enough relationships, if you give it enough dimensionality, if you do that over and over again, that you'll somehow get, pile up enough data, and voila, consciousness creates itself. And sorry. Hmm. And to be quite honest with you, um, it's not doing what it's advertised to do. It's not really artificial intelligence. It is something amazing, really. It is computers beginning to, use, being able to listen and respond in a way that resembles humans, how humans do it. And it's also beginning to sort of store information in a more human way. This is how we store memories, years of memory, decades of memories in neural nets. That's what these are. But the thing is, these computers are doing it a lot more inefficiently. Whereas we use 100 watts, and that 100 watts your brain works on. Just think about it. Any genius, any genius who discovered anything, any genius who wrote something, directed something, acted something, any genius who did those things did it with this 100-watt wonder. And yet we're chugging away with huge data centers just to mimic the way human beings write things, basically by going through the training data of millions, billions of documents, more millions, billions of documents, and figuring out what's the pattern amidst them all that fits whatever. I know this is probably annoying you, but it's I'm trying to. It's okay. Maybe I have to move myself. Uh, 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 mm, mm. It's what what occurs to me is that people are putting a lot of brute force behind the wrong approach. And this is sort of the irony of it all. I mean, but it's not the first time it's happened, I don't think. The mindset of a person coming out of, say, the 30s and 40s is that, you know, your computer is going to be a multi room, vacuum tube powered machine. You're go back further, and you know how they're making, their glorified calculators, their different engines and such. Babbage is designing them as mechanical creations. You know, you see where I'm going here? So they're thinking mechanical. they're thinking um, they're thinking uh, vacuum tubes, which are a kind of it's well your old CRT TV, that was a vacuum tube, a very big vacuum tube, with an electron gun at the back shooting electron beams at a phosphor screen. I got my original entertainment system for that, and it's like it used to take the whole footprint of that poor thing, that poor entertainment system, and now its successors, the HD televisions that I got later on, just perch like little birds on a couple of lay feet on that on just a fraction of the footprint. And that's one of the things, people were thinking that was sort of an evolutionary dead end. Doing a an HD TV the way you would a regular sort of you know doing an HD TV the way you would do a regular standard definition television. And those things were heavy too. Uh, and there again, we got another sort of race, another sort of marketing sort of thing that's kind of run its course. You've got 8K televisions, but are people really going to get too concerned about getting an 8K television? I don't think so. The next big thing's going to be more like color, and once that's settled down, what's next? Perhaps trying to do 3D again, only this time without the stereoscopic glasses. Or there's going to be something else. There's always going to be something else. We are bad often at predicting the way that the future goes because we're often invested in just iterating and evolving. Pardon me. What currently works, what we currently know. And right now, the transformers, the the sort of large language models and these things, they're what people know and they're what people are iterating. But I think, and I'm speaking as somebody who's at least a decently good amateur layperson expert, for all that's worth, about cognitive processes. There are a lot of things going on in our brain that enable us to do the things we do, that give us natural general intelligence. But we can say that some of the elements of natural general intelligence, they're not sort of just. It's not that you have some little elf on a shelf in your brain who is just figuring out everything and then controlling everything. No. Now his name is probably disgraced to a certain extent, but Marvin Minsky was a smart person about cognitive matters, I think. because he understood that you don't have to have everything be smart. You don't have to have everything be smart. You just have to have, you set up things that have smaller responsibilities that don't have to be so smart because they're just handling one job, and you kind of build up those elements and kind of get a you kind of aim for something that's more, I guess, emergent. Because if you look at the way the human brain is works, it's very much, the functions are varied. The functions are, you know they're the system actually kind of uses one part and does multiple different things with it. The system is also, it's got you've got, like, you hear about Broca's area, you hear about Wernicke's area, you hear about the way that some people have sight, or can recognize objects despite being sort of blind, in a sense, because they lack the occipital lobe, um, brain stuff. They lack that in order to interpret what's going on, but they have the sort of the midbrain sort of, you know internal gadgetry that can pick out things, that can deliver things to other parts of the brain that do things like associative processing. There is a kind of, I guess my point is, if we're patterning off of human intelligence, then we have to recognize that human intelligence is just not simply we pile data up until something goes, aha. No, we're not doing that. It's not simply learning patterns until suddenly the machine doing the learning is, boom, a true artificial intelligence. Now there's got to be I think we're neglecting the question of how to create more emergent sort of systems, of how to create reflective sort of systems that have a feedback to reality. I mean, like, a lot of the processing that we're doing, I think, is we're trying to do through brute force calculation things that normal human beings don't. We don't do a whole bunch of brute force calculation. We do a lot of very messy sort of analog sufficing. When a child is taught, a child is, we show them different examples of things. We, they might look at what we call an apple, and they might invent a different sort of label for it, an inventive sort of naive label for it, like a red fruit or something like that. Or they might call a pear a sweet apple or something like that, or a mushy apple or something like that. You know, they'll make new associations. They won't learn it perfectly. They'll learn it with their own sort of interpretation running. You know, so you know, it occurs to me that perhaps we're just not we're expecting one sort of process, one kind of process, one kind of system, one kind of structure to do everything. When what we really should be doing is trying to create that sort of symphony of parts that's going on up here. But another thing, I think too many people are taking an approach that is basically all about replacing, automating a certain kind of labor with with the generative AI. And I think this is extraordinarily short-sighted, not just because I'd like to be in that industry someday, but also because, quite frankly, part of the whole point of what you do in an entertainment industry and a content generating industry is that you're trying to maintain interest. And if all you can do is just sort of loop back a feedback loop of, other people's work kind of fed back, if all you can do is kind of a loop of derivative work, then what you're going to do is that you're eventually going to drive the conditioning of people to come to a theater, to to go to a show on Netflix or something like that, or on Prime, or on whatever streaming service. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody in particular. But what I'm saying is, if you succeed at making everything an AI sort of thing, hmm, hmm, it's a bit bloodshot. If you succeed at that, um, then I think what you're just going to have eventually is sort of a cognitive sort of, you know, it's like in the old days. When you had either um, tapes on a reel, like cassette tapes. Does anybody remember cassette tapes? Oh, I used to have a whole collection of cassette tapes, and now that's gone. Um, there were also things called CDs back when we needed physical media to have our music collection. Y'all whippersnappers. Um, yeah, but really, the content. If you just have the same content over and over again, people are learning machines in a way. People are learning machines, and what happens is that people learn the formula, they learn the style, they learn the music too well, and it stops activating the brain so much. It stops feeding people the nice little dopamine rewards that make it worth it to go on to things. I mean, there are so many things that I think people do wrong from my amateur sitting in front of a webcam perspective. There's so many things that people do wrong that they'd recognize they were doing wrong if they took more courses in cognitive science and neuroscience, and if they investigated different angles on artificial intelligence, like, you know, if they looked at things in terms of emergent sort of systems working together, you know, creating something that's more than the sum of its parts. If they understood things that way instead of just as, a data thing, sort of the Skynet sort of sensibility that, oh, I'm just going to learn and learn and learn and learn and learn. It learned, it learned at a geometric rate, and pow, one day it becomes, sentient. I think we didn't do that. The thing about it is that intelligence evolved as an applied quantity, as an applied thing. It was used. That's the thing. That's one of the keys, is that it was used. There was a feedback with reality, you know, building up from the smallest bacteria with some ability to whip a cilia around and drive it towards, in a roundabout way, drive it towards greater food or drive it away from toxic chemicals or whatever. At some point, the the biological systems gave themselves some way of discerning bad fate from good fate, bad thing from good thing. And no, it didn't stay as simple as that. New dimensions kind of cropped up as, different creatures wanted to be able to fool something, some things that were trying to do good for themselves. You know, they wanted to be able to fool other creatures into doing things that were bad for their interests. So they learned trickery, they learned mimicry, they learned, ways of attracting, luring other creatures, and then other creatures had to evolve brains that allowed them to go, oh no, 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 there's something else going on here. Oh, I can smell this other fish here. I'm going to go away. That sort of survival built intelligence step by step from an applied feedback heavy sort of system. It was built up from, all the different things, all the different sensory and chemical and whatever sort of feedbacks that allowed the creatures involved to to get some impression of the outside environment upon this inside environment. And we're just the ones who finally evolved some way of hypercharging it up here in our cerebral cortex. And we're the ones who have some idea of how to remake what happened up here out there. But I think an important part of that is that we have to recognize how sophisticated what we do is. We've kind of gotten this attitude towards computers where we're saying to ourselves, pardon me, where we're saying to ourselves, those computers are smarter than us. They can do all this math and do all these calculations that that I just can't do. So therefore, the computer is smarter than me. But it all depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about something that's smarter than you, I mean, the computer is doing some things that just would break my brain. I'm not a stupid person either, you know. But the thing about it is, somebody programmed it, and don't get me wrong with AI. It's not. I don't think it's built such that going to this new thing that you're necessarily taking that out of the equation. You're just making a more sophisticated interface. You can teach. Going back to the Apple example, you can teach um, a machine learning system like this, a large language model. You can teach it what it means, what an apple means. But at the same time, um, how about a system that can teach itself about things? I can, of my own accord, if you see one of the books back there, there's a, let's see, I've been trying to, I have an interest in, there's a sort of like, if you can't beat them, join them sort of sense of AI thing with me where I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I, it's, about directly behind me. You'd have to, never mind. But I'm trying to teach myself, or rather, refresh myself on the math that I used to know. Um, or rather, kind of figure out what the rules of it are, and then kind of step forward and, finally, so armed, confront um, confront the mathematics, the sort of matrix mathematics and other things. And I'm talking literal matrix mathematics, as in there's a field called linear algebra that basically is about matrix and vector um algebra of mathematics, where you do what a matrix is in math is, it's, you've got one, two, three, four, five, six cells, and in each cell you've got a value, and you can multiply that value by other values, and so on and so forth. So that's sort of you know that there is the idea that is that underlies a lot of modern AI. So I'm trying to get it so that I've got some background in this. But it's sort of, going around and around on this. We're being sold something that's basically a very sophisticated predictor of verbal patterns, of, very sophisticated recoverer of images, still and moving. And we're trying to build, trying to just brute force our way to this through all that data, and it's taking huge amounts of energy and huge amounts of resources to do it. And the whole economy is getting kind of lopsided as a result. And this is not a good thing. I think at a basic level, our problem here is we're over specializing. We're taking something that was good for a certain purpose, and we're telling ourselves, okay, we're just going to hypercharge this and make it, and then hopefully it'll translate to something, you know, more sentient. Pardon me. So if I could sum up what some of the things I've been saying in a more succinct fashion, your brain doesn't work the way a large language model or the transformer models work, and yet it does to a certain extent work that way, but it more in the parts, more in the lower sort of structure. And it's like the problem is that you know you take a human artist, you take a human artist, and you put that human artist to work. You tell them, okay, your job now is to create a story about a samurai and a punk panda who wears a mohawk, a black and white mohawk. You know? Okay, then. What then? What then? It what then? That that guy can, you know, he can go over and over in his head. Okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to structure this story? How am I going to get into it? How am I going to get out of it? What's the beginning? What's the end? What's the middle? And that person can then turn around and having done a first draft of that, they can turn around, reflect on what they've done, take a look at what they've done, and perhaps be inspired to do something a little different or a lot different based on something they've learned or based on some idea that comes to mind. It you get a sense, with a real artist, you get a sense of, you're not just you don't you might prompt them, you might give them an idea, say you might tell them what you want, but then they can go and they can take that and they can self prompt. I mean, think about that. Self prompting. Let's say you want to, paint the side of your van and you're one of those kids who loves rock and roll, and so you do that wizard and unicorn and whatever on the side of your van. But if you're really creative, you can go and do things that you know wouldn't necessarily occur to other people. You can go beyond that prompt and say, well, what if I do this and change it? And you rerun the whole thing. You self prompt, you self start, you self initiate. But you know, the, who's doing the initiation? Who's doing the prompting? We are. That's part of the thing. It's part of what makes us kind of a big fraud in a certain sense, a big put up job that essentially we're getting fed back our own intelligence. We're getting fed back the pattern of our own intelligence, which we recognize as intelligence, and then mistake as being the machine's intelligence. Now, while the machine is doing something extraordinary with the way it stores that information, with the way it learns that information, while that's perfectly extraordinary all by itself, what we would do instead is 100 times more extraordinary because what it's doing is just derivative. What it's doing is just, you know, it's a derivation of our own intelligence. It it extracts the pattern in that image and then restores it, but it doesn't go and say, okay, then what if I go in a different direction? It doesn't tell itself, okay, it can. There's a concept in information theory called logical depth, and it essentially boils down to um, the effort your message saves another person for having to take. So, for example, there's a lot of logical depth in the xenomorph alien from Aliens. It's a design that was, entirely different from what people had seen before in a movie. And that, that's sort of something that kind of got, pardon me. The same can be said for the Predator design from that movie franchise. And you get different sort of creature designs. You get different sort of um, you get different sorts of, like with Star Wars, all those different creature designs, all those different sort of animated creatures, all the different designs of the spaceships and everything. There is a sort of there's a logic, a reason, a feeling, a sort of something there that exists there because somebody put some thought into it, and that thought became part of an organizing principle of that thing, or the emotion became an organizing principle of that thing. You want, a character can be made with the intention of the character being terrifying, or it can be made with the intention of the character being adorable, you know, of having baby like features, for example. Long story short, all the different attributes of things in movies like the ones behind my arm, all the different things there's thought and understanding and science and all kinds of other different things that go into why those things look, sound, generally feel the way they do. But an AI can just derive the pattern of that. The pattern, sort of it can pattern grab that logical depth, but it can't generate that logical depth itself. And it doesn't have a kind of awareness and understanding that would allow it to kind of go back and forth with us about what it's thinking, what it's looking at, what it wants us to feel. And this is part of what dooms AI art, generative AI, as a creative force. Only problem is it might destroy the source of all that logical depth. It might destroy the what allow the sort of ability to you know to compress meaning into those small spaces, into the few strokes of a character, into the just the silhouette of a character, the appearance of a character, all those different things that let us say, okay, this is who that is. This is that character, and this is what that character is thinking, and so on and so forth. It's one of the reasons why I talk about, lately. That's one of the reasons why I talk about the whole thing with that video that I saw. Because what does the people look perfect? They look perfect. They look like they did, you know, decades ago, before I was born. But unfortunately, they don't quite have the same internal life. The characters don't have the same logical depth that comes from having an actual person there acting, or at least the an organization of symbols, a structure of symbols, like an animated, you know, like an animated creation might be able to offer you. Where one person's drawing the figures, one person's doing the coloring on them, one person's doing the voice behind the scenes, and so on and so forth. We pour meaning into things, concentrate meaning into things, but the but the AI can't do that. It doesn't know how. It doesn't understand the depths of what it's looking at. It can just reproduce a ghost of them. It can reproduce an image of them, a derivation. But I think people are going to find that's not good enough. If you got something that's being done with fewer bits, less information, less power, 100-watt wonder, then there is something to the way it's being done by the much more efficient, or much more powerful, much more creative system. There's something to the way it's being done that is superior to the way the other thing is doing. Something is computing a lot better when it comes to it's working a lot better starting out from a human being than it is from that data center. And that's not to get on this sort of, oh, humanity is going to be forever on top in terms of all these things. No. But it's like what exactly are we what exactly is being created here? If we're realistic enough, we'll realize that the best it will be able to do in what it's doing there is kind of an inferior copy of something better. It takes a bit more time, it takes a little bit more money, but then again, you don't have to spend so much time and money editing and changing it and whatever in order to make it, in order to make it a suitable product for distribution. And to me, that's the thing. That's the thing I've heard over and over again is how much effort it takes to actually polish these things, polish these scripts, polish you know, these novels, polish these other things into something that people would actually want to see, want to watch, and so on and so forth. At a certain point, you're doing so much work putting back the logical depth, fixing the logical depth in these things. You're putting so much work into it with the old fashioned hardware and software that you might as well have started out with that software for all the time it will take, for all the money it will take. You know, it would be better if it would just be better if you started off with the people in the first place. What I really think AI should be used for in, you know, in the here and now, I think we should make tools that allow people who learn about, you know, film and electronic aesthetics, make tools that makes it easier for the actual artists with the actual brains, the actual programmers with the actual brains, the actual intelligences that currently exist and need the help and might pay for the help. It's enhanced natural intelligence. Enhance natural intelligence. Enhance what natural intelligence does and can do. Don't simply be trying to replace it. There seems to be not a misogynist, but a misanthropic sort of sensibility to the way the modern computer, the modern internet and the modern social media, and it all seems to be run by people who hate how expensive actual people are. There seems to be this sort of sensibility of, you know, every person is a financial liability waiting to be cut out of the equation. And I think that sort of attitude is kind of pathetic, kind of bad, and just what's the good in it? We're not all competing to be made obsolete. If you're going to change the world, change it for the better. Instead of just doing things that help yourself, help others, and people will pay for that. There's a business in that. And admit to people, admit something. Admit that general artificial intelligence, what people are really thinking of when they type the chat GPT things, when they're talking to ChatGPT, they're not thinking, "Oh, I'm talking to a very sophisticated word predictor." No, they're working on what you might call the user illusion, which is the illusion that you're talking to an actual intelligent entity. We're kind of being given a false sort of science fiction sort of sense of things when, well, when what we really should be getting is a more honest picture of things and an opportunity to kind of participate in it and advance things and make things fit better, the good of the people in general. Because really, are people really going to accept this charge for AI when all it just seems to be doing is just replacing people? Yeah. So I guess that's my point for today. um, I'll see you guys later.